Unfortunately, I don't think the bottom is in, but fortunately, it's pretty close, and I don't really think that we can bottom until the spam war is resolved. The Bitcoin network, I think, is suffering from this parasite, this attack, and once that is resolved in August, I think we can moon. The miners can activate a little bit early, which I think is the most bullish scenario. So I'm predicting that that will happen, and I'm hopeful that that will happen. But until we get resolution, there's going to be maximum uncertainty.
Welcome again to the BitcoinTreasuries.net podcast. I'm here back with Soleil for our. It's been a few months, Soleil, since we had our, I would say, normally quarterly options update, but it's been probably since February since we last talked about the options market. Bitcoin's price, we drew down from the 80,000s down to 60K in the matter of, what was it, 10 days maybe? But we had a nice 10% bounce over the last, 3, 4, 5 days here. Looking back, where are we in the cycle? Have we really bottomed? There's no way to know, but how are you thinking about Bitcoin's price? And it still does seem like the 4-year cycle might have some legs at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. I do kind of think that the 4-year cycle is dead. I think way back in the day, Dan Hillary did a video on it more closely following the business cycle, which kind of is almost 4 years. So I think it just kind of seems like it, but isn't really. And unfortunately, I don't think the bottom is in, but fortunately, it's pretty close. And I don't really think that we can bottom until the spam war is resolved. There could be some global economic stuff too. Like I think they're kind of playing some games with the war, and we got the new Fed coming in. And I think that they want to print, and I think that they want to lower rates, which is going to probably, make everything go vertical. But they need a reason, right? So if they come in and just lower rates, it looks like they're capitulating to Trump. And egos are always in play here. So they need an excuse to print. And I think they'll either do it if the war isn't enough, then they'll just tank the market somehow. So there's that could happen in the next couple of months. And then the spam war has to be concluded before Bitcoin will be almost kind of like a recuperating patient, right? We've had this parasite of spam on the blockchain that has been getting worse ever since SegWit. So there was an inscriptions hack bug that was identified back in the day, and instead of patching it, they just refused to admit that it was a bug. And it has what allowed the spam to really take off and start to bloat the blockchain. If you look at all the different properties of money, arbitrary data is not in the list, right? You've got fungibility and scalability and all of those different things. And if you wrote someone a check and said, oh, by the way, I'm going to attach a JPEG or an MP4 video in the memo spot, you'd think they were a lunatic, right? And if it had like objectionable material on it, you might have to punch them in the face. You know what I mean? You can't just accept that these things are monetary use cases. And so the Bitcoin network, I think, is suffering from this parasite, this attack. And once that is resolved in August, I think we can moon. So maximum uncertainty about whether BIP 110 will activate successfully or not will happen in early August at a certain block height. And so it's not an exact date. The miners can activate a little bit early, which I think is the most bullish scenario. So I'm predicting that that will happen, and I'm hopeful that that will happen. But until we get resolution, there's going to be maximum uncertainty in the Bitcoin network around the outcome of this decision. And so I think we probably end up bottoming at the beginning of August before the spam war comes to its conclusion. There could be a little bit of follow-on back and forth. If BIP 110 is successful, the spammers could come up with their own soft fork. That would be called a user rejected soft fork. And then if the spammers are still unsuccessful, they've got one last ditch attempt that they could make, which would be hard forking it. Which, if anybody remembers the block size wars, that would be like a Bcash or a BSV when they forked off a completely separate coin. And if that happens, that would be bullish eventually, but yeah, we could see some more downward price spiral if that happens. But make sure we come back to this. If the spammers do hard fork this, there are some significant questions that Bitcoin treasury companies will need to decide, and I hope they're thinking about it now. But for now, we can just talk about the price action and the resolution of the conflict if you want, or whatever direction you want to take it in.
Yeah, well, I think certainly, like, for people who are interested in Bitcoin equities, like strategy, like a lot of them might be scratching their head or have just, scratched the surface of this whole debate. But a hard fork of Bitcoin where, essentially another, Bitcoin is forked into two different paths and two different tokens moving forward is like a black swan that I think is not tenable. And I think, learning from the past hard forks throughout Bitcoin's history, the other coins that forked off for various reasons, for so-called upgrades to the blockchain that people thought Bitcoin needed to be improved upon. I think that's untenable for the network, and I think there'll be some sort of resolution here, and it's hard to foresee what that is. But I think a lot of the Bitcoin treasury companies are just out there grinding. They're paying attention to what's going on, within the Bitcoin community, within the developer community, and with these proposals that are out there. Um, do you do you think that has had a significant impact in Bitcoin's price and why we're sitting, maybe in the mid 60s? Obviously, Bitcoin's been, wildly responsive to or predictive of, I guess, hostilities with the U.S. and Iran and global supply shocks of oil that have been happening. But do you think that the hard fork really, or the BIP 110 and the spam so-called spam wars have really played into that price action right now? I want to talk about something that comes up in almost every conversation I have with Treasury executives. They get the Bitcoin thesis, they see the macro case, but then they walk into a board meeting and the first question is, who's holding it? Are they regulated? Are they insured? Can we audit this? That's where BitGo comes in. BitGo is an OCC regulated national trust bank. That means they operate under the same federal oversight as the institutions your board already trusts. Your assets are held in segregated trust accounts, never commingled. They're secured in 100% cold storage with multi-signature architecture. If you're building a case for Bitcoin on your balance sheet, BitGo is the custody partner that turns a board conversation from why into when. Visit bitgo.com/Bitcoin-treasury to connect with their team.
It's the best kept secret known by every true Bitcoin OG. CoinKite has been building the gold standard in private key security for years, and they just raised the bar again. The Cold Card Q is an absolute powerhouse for serious Bitcoin treasuries. We're talking a full QWERTY keyboard, air gap protections, and it's built for maximum security. The brand new Cold Card MK5, it has a massive Gorilla Glass screen and new NFC functionality for an even more seamless experience. So if your business is large or small, there's a cold card for you. Head to store.coinkite.com and use the code 6BT at checkout for 6% off. Stop cutting corners on your Bitcoin treasury. You wish for it. Bitcoin is finally on sale. And if you're sitting on BTC and want liquidity without dumping your stack, Arch Lending can make it easy. You can get USD or USDC in minutes, and your collateral stays in qualified custody. They never rehypothecate your assets. As your assets move up and down in value, you can scale your credit line instantly or pull the collateral back when the market runs. If you need help, you get real humans 24/7, not bots. This is Arch Lending. Simple tiers, public pricing. You can check them out at archlending.com.
Yeah, I think the trend of the core developers allowing for this attack surface to develop and actually start removing the filters that were giving us the smallest amount of protection that we had is contributing to the network, basically slowing down, right? If you just have enough data to send the transaction, right? I send you 0.1 Bitcoin, and all we got to do is put in the ledger 0.1 plus on your side and 0.1 minus on my side. If that's all the data that we have to store, then we're good to go. But if we're going to now say, you know what, in addition to that, we're going to turn this into distributed free data storage for spammers. And now the node doesn't just have to store a +1 -1 in the ledger. Now they have to store a gig of of spam data and images. obviously that is going to choke the network. So I do think that the price action is reflective of the attack surface that Bitcoin Core has made us vulnerable to. And once we get that cleaned up, I think it's off to the races and we can moon again.
Yeah, and just to zoom out a little bit, again, I'm not like the super technical person to talk about this at length but again, just for framing for some of our viewers, there's basically an op return field, which is a script in Bitcoin where basically arbitrary data can be etched into the Bitcoin blockchain. In association with transactions, and the resulting portion of those transactions where the data is written, those tokens are effectively unspendable moving forward, and there's concern about bloat in Bitcoin's blockchain and the broader UTXO set, so that nodes that do relay Bitcoin's transactions, that do keep a record of all of Bitcoin's transactions, that becomes more expensive the more arbitrary data that's put on the blockchain. And just to your point, Soleil, there was a filter on that by default in Bitcoin's core software that many nodes run, most nodes run, certainly. I would say, and a lot of economic nodes such as miners run, and that filter was fairly recently removed as a default
Right.
for nodes, and that's allowed. I guess people who want to put so-called spam, which I agree that's a fair term to call it, this arbitrary data, on the Bitcoin monetary network. It allows it to basically more easily be put into the blockchain. There's a lot of side projects who monetize, I guess, this feature or bug, however you sit in reference to the op return, the higher limit on op return data. There's companies that monetize this, and create so-called rare satoshis, rare coins, and various different NFT like products. And this isn't part of the mainstream conversation. I think that Bitcoiners who maybe are just buying Bitcoin and stacking their sats necessarily pay attention to. A lot of the Bitcoin investors in Bitcoin Treasury companies aren't even aware maybe that it's going on. So I think it's good to bring this kind of debate that's happening behind the scenes, kind of bring it to the forefront and talk about it, because it is important. When we're talking about the usefulness of the Bitcoin network as transferring Bitcoin, onto the blockchain and transferring value to and from individuals. Do you want to dig into, like, how can this be resolved? As you see it, like you said, miners can activate this bit proposal, and again, I'm not the guy to dig into the technical nitty gritty, but like what are outcomes that are either, I guess, bullish for filtering this spam out, and what is an outcome that you would see as maybe a failure of people trying to filter out the spam?
As I was talking about with the ledger only. So Bitcoin is as close to perfect money as we have, and we want to keep it that way. And so I would argue that arbitrary data is spam. That people say, oh, I don't know what spam is. All of the arbitrary data is spam. Now, as you alluded to, some people do use it, and it's impossible to keep 100% of it out, which is why the filters were limiting it to a very small amount. I think it was 40,
Maybe
40
83
kilobytes.
bytes. 83
Yeah,
bytes, I think.
yeah, and then it went up from 40 to 80, and then they were saying, oh, well, maybe we should bump it up to 160. And then they were just like, oh, screw it, let's just take the filters off because we don't want to have to keep like ratcheting it up. And the problem with that is, if you look at an image, with like 80 or 160, like it's just, you can't see anything, right? So it's kind of okay to have this teeny tiny amount of arbitrary data as long as it's just like a hash. And some of these people are building on that, and they need a little string of numbers to deal with. But like once it becomes a large enough image and the resolution is such that you can actually like put objectionable material images in the blockchain, then you're not simply making like Bitcoin is supposed to be censorless and permissionless, right? And as long as I'm just sending a ledger account, +1, -1, there's nothing to object to. It's a completely amoral decision. There's no way that anyone can have an opinion on that. You don't even know what I bought with it. Like, you could object to what I paid, got for the Bitcoin, but you're not going to know. So that's none of your business. But once you open up the transaction to be able to attach an image, now having an opinion on whether it's objectionable or not becomes possible. And so the critics of BIP110 and the critics of the anti-spam category is like, oh, well, you shouldn't have an opinion on whether this is objectionable or not. But what I'm saying is the fact that you're letting arbitrary data get big enough to even form an opinion is the problem. And so that's what I think spam is solving. To steelman the argument of the, I'm going to call them the spammers because it's whatever. The argument of the spammers is like, if the protocol allows it, then that's just fine. It's just whatever the protocol allows, it's none of my business, and we'll just let it do that. But we change the protocol all the time, so it's up to the node runners to decide what the consensus rules will be. So yes, I do admit that these things are possible, but it's up to Bitcoiners to run the node that you think has the best protocol and the best consensus rules. And then, it's kind of like, it's not exactly the majority wins, because there's a little bit of, there's checks and balances between the node runners and the miners. But I'm sorry, you wanted me to go through the game theory of how this plays out. So at a particular block height, I don't remember the number, but with the way that the blocks are being basically found at this point, we should get a resolution to this in August. So there is a block height at which the nodes that are running the BIP110 software will activate, and they will start throwing spam blocks in the trash. So any blocks that are not signaling for BIP110 will basically not be allowed to be put on the blockchain. And there is a period of time before that where the miners can actually start signaling for BIP110 early. I'm hoping that happens, because that would be the most bullish signal for Bitcoin, in that the miners are also on board with being anti-spam. And in that scenario, if over 55% of the miners start signaling for BIP110, then we would actually get an early activation, and it would be a miner activated soft fork instead of a user activated soft fork. But if the miners don't flip the switch before the mandatory activation date, the nodes will attempt to force their hand and say, look, you work for the network. The nodes is really what Bitcoin is about, and enforces the consensus rules. And if that happens, then one of three scenarios will happen. So either the miners will capitulate, right? Because they will not want to risk losing the block rewards, right? Because if BIP110 is successful, and anyone who has mined blocks, we're gonna say mined blocks that are not BIP110 compliant, if the other miners all start mining for BIP110, whoever didn't has the risk of their blocks being losing the rewards. So they mined blocks, like, yay, we got the mining rewards. But if BIP110 wins and they did not signal for BIP110, they would end up losing those blocks. So either that happens and the miners do finally capitulate and BIP110 successfully activates, or the miners don't capitulate and they all just hold hands and refuse to switch. In that case, BIP110 dies and nothing happens. And we could just continue on with the same protocol that we have now. And then there's a third scenario, which is pretty unlikely, but is the one that is a little bit scarier and is possible. So people do need to think about it. Is that if, let's just say 45% of the miners start signaling for BIP110, It's not enough to trigger the miner activated soft fork of 55% requirement. And during mandatory signaling, there's going to be this like race to see which chain will become longer. And since the core side would have 55%, their chain would continue to get longer and longer and longer. And there's going to be a little bit of a standoff. It would have the advantage on one sense for core because they would have most of the hash power, so their chain is going to be continuing to get longer. But there's a secret kind of a secret sauce or whatever that the BIP110 chain has, in that because this is a soft fork, all of the BIP110 blocks are valid on the core chain, but all of the core blocks are not valid on the BIP110 chain. So if after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks even, if enough miners decided to flip, then the entire core chain would get wiped out. But the BIP110 blocks are valid on the core chain, so it's impossible for BIP110 blocks to get reorged and orphaned. So there's a little bit of a game theory advantage for BIP110 in that scenario. But however long it took to decide which chain split was actually became dominant in wins, there would be a period of, maybe a couple of weeks where it would actually be kind of dangerous to transact in Bitcoin. So that is something that Bitcoin treasury companies and really all Bitcoiners need to be aware of, that in the event of a contentious split, you may want to just not move your coins around, and Bitcoin treasury companies will probably have to pause their buying activities over maybe that couple of week period. So, maybe that also hurts the price because it's going to be too dangerous to transact. Like, you're going to have to play a wait and see game to see who wins, and then Bitcoin just goes back to normal after that.
Yeah. In the world where, most of the mining hash rate doesn't adopt BIP110, how does that play out? Is there a capitulation, from the nodes who are rejecting the blocks that aren't signaling, BIP110?
They just become irrelevant. If the miners operate in lockstep and they just refuse to signal for BIP110, then the BIP110 nodes have a decision to make. Do they just continue to run an irrelevant protocol and continue to throw spam blocks in the trash? BIP110 is only a year long anyway, and that was intentional because this was kind of like an emergency break fix. They saw the spam threat as something that had to be fixed quickly. So BIP110 was strategically designed to be just enough to fix the threat without being permanent and without being an overreach as far as restricting too much of what people are doing. Like, literally the only ability that people are losing is the ability to put these images on. Like, it's not a threat to multi-sig and all of the UTXOs that are already in existence are grandfathered in. So people are not going to get their UTXOs frozen. I think Greg Maxwell is going to pull a stunt. Maybe he already has. There's a weird way where you can go through the trouble of intentionally creating a UTXO that becomes unspendable under BIP110. But in that sense, he's literally just throwing himself into traffic and trying to get run over. No one else on the planet has to worry about this. The BIP has been very careful not to screw anyone over who's already transacted.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to monitor, and yeah, I'm sure treasury companies are certainly paying attention to this, and there may be some volatile price action around that date in August. That's kind of targeted there, and we'll be keen to monitor it, and maybe if there's any fireworks, we'll have to have you back on for an emergency pod, certainly, Soleil, during that time.
Let's just say that BIP110 is successful, but the spammers don't want to take no for an answer. They user reject it, maybe that fails, and then they fork off, right? That means that strategy by then, let's just say they have 800,000-900,000 Bitcoin. They will now have 8 or 900,000 of the additional coin. So whatever they fork off onto, we can, Bcash came out as BCH, maybe we'll call it like BSpam or whatever, like whatever that coin is. And so all of these Bitcoin treasury companies are going to have a decision to make. Do they immediately just sell the forked coin, pocket the fiat, and buy Bitcoin with it? Or do they hodl both and see which one wins? It's going to be fun to watch and see which Bitcoin treasury companies actually have the balls to make a decision and vote with their economic activity behind what they think is the true Bitcoin. So that will be a fun game theory thing that treasury companies need to think about, and really all Bitcoiners need to think about it, because back during the block size wars, I thought it was cool. Like, I got free coins, right? I didn't really realize the threat, or like, oh, this could really hurt Bitcoin or whatever. I just thought I was getting a free airdrop of an altcoin, and like, cool, I got double the coins. But I can't imagine owning 900,000 BSpam coins, and like, what do I do with it? Do I hodl them? Because they pitched Bitcoin to me that Saylor doesn't have any more influence over the network than I do, right? Like, I run a node, he runs a node. And so it doesn't matter if you have 0.1 Bitcoin or a million Bitcoin, like, everybody gets the same vote in the consensus. But if someone who has a million Bitcoin dumps a million altcoin on the market, like, that price is going to take a serious hit. And people are not going to want to mine that coin, right? People are going to want to mine the coin that goes up. So there is a little bit of weird economic incentive for the big players to influence the price if there does become a contentious chain split. So that's all something that people need to think about as well.
If you're building or managing a Bitcoin treasury, you need institutional infrastructure to match. BitGo is the digital asset backbone trusted by thousands of institutions worldwide, offering regulated custody, OTC trading, financing, and settlement all under one roof. They're now a publicly traded company on the NYSE and hold a federally chartered national bank license from the OCC. For Bitcoin treasury companies, this is the infrastructure layer that matters. Learn more at bitgo.com. CoinKite has been building the gold standard in Bitcoin private key security for years, and they just raised the bar again. The brand new Coldcard MK5 brings a massive Gorilla Glass screen and new NFC functionality for a more seamless experience. The Coldcard Q is an absolute powerhouse for serious Bitcoiners, with a full QWERTY keyboard, air-gapped, and built for maximum security. Whatever your setup, executive, Bitcoiner, Bitcoin treasury, there's a Coldcard for you. Head to store.coinkite.com and use code 6BT at checkout for 6% off.
The dip is here, and with it, you might be thinking, is it time for me to borrow against my Bitcoin? Enter Arch Lending. They're building the most transparent borrowing experience in crypto. We're talking industry-leading rates from 8.49% when you borrow against BTC, and you receive USD within minutes. Your assets stay protected with qualified custody. There's no rehypothecation, and verifiable segregated addresses are used always. As your collateral grows, you can unlock more liquidity, adjust your line anytime, and extend your term with a single click. And with 24/7 white glove support, you're never going to feel like you're on your own. Arch Lending, simple terms, public pricing, market-leading rates at every size. You can learn more at archlending.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously the result of, those Bitcoin Cash forks, and, eventually BSV, where that, people sold the token that wasn't Bitcoin and bought, more Bitcoin. So yeah, I think that, as much as, large economic actors don't, have as much of a voice with their node, they certainly do have the economic sway, like you said, to be able to sell, hopefully it doesn't come to this, that there's multiple tokens, that there's some sort of fork and there's multiple tokens where, companies are, put to the test and do have to, make that, decision, which, is certainly going to hurt the network and destroy the other network. So yeah, hopefully it doesn't come to that. Yeah, we'll be keen to monitor that. I'd love to dig into some other topics here. Like this week, there's been, I guess, like a lot of real debate in the Bitcoin community, and we're hitting a couple lightning rod topics, Soleil. But we've got a lot of like Bitcoiner OG types who are, I guess, bearish Bitcoin treasury companies. And, it's like, I think a lot of them just, are frustrated maybe with some of the ways that a company like Strategy are marketing. Maybe they're a little, maybe they're purists in the fact that they think Bitcoin's the best investment, and anything else that isn't just buying and self custodying your own Bitcoin, or holding it in multi sig is something that goes against the ethos of Bitcoin. So to see a company like Strategy sucking a lot of capital out of the room is something that they don't agree with. What's your take, I guess, on the overall attack and shade that's been thrown towards Bitcoin treasury companies recently?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is unfair, but at the same time, I think a lot of the OGs, well, either admired or at least tolerated Saylor when he was saying no second best. You know what I mean? That's like the based Saylor, and there's memes of it, and GIFs and just everything under the sun. And that kind of stuff everyone can get behind. But then, when he comes out with a promo that says, we turn Bitcoin into money, it's like, oh, really? Okay, so you were really just, were you lying the whole time? You were, just trying to make us think you were a Bitcoiner kind of thing. So I think there's a little bit of missteps made on Saylor's part with some of the pivot. And Maxis have very, very low tolerance for those games, because I think they just have flashbacks of crypto scams and all of these other projects that tend to blow up. I don't think it's deserved to an extent, right? Because every company should buy Bitcoin. It doesn't make sense to hold cash. The criticisms for some of these things are real, but by me being this close to it, I also understand the proper context, because I don't remember if you remember the tweet that he got a lot of heat for. It was the one where he said the most interesting thing in Bitcoin right now is, it was like something about daily digital credit or something. It was basically a shout out to I think what SATA was doing, what Strive was doing with SATA. That was, if you're close to it, people were mad about it because they were like, oh, that's not the most interesting thing in Bitcoin. Like, the spam war is the most interesting thing. Like, we're fighting for Bitcoin's life. Like, why are you concerned about all this dumb shit when we're literally over here in a life or death battle for Bitcoin's future? But why did he say interesting? That was the inside baseball is that was a shout out to Jeff Walton, right? Punter Jeff, because that's his catchphrase. Jeff is always like, this is interesting, that's interesting, right? So that tweet was maybe it was a little tone deaf because the OGs aren't going to get it, but we all to me, that's a tip of the cap to Jeff, right? Every once in a while, they'll throw True North a little, like a little attaboy. They'll say, oh, Bitcoin per share is our True North or something. I mean, they'll give a little tip of the cap kind of thing. And so if you understand the inside joke or whatever, then you're not going to get mad about it. But the OGs, they're not paying attention, so they don't really understand why he's using the exact words that he's using, and all they're doing is taking offense and getting butthurt over the fact that he said that stonks are more interesting than Bitcoin. It's like, no, that's not exactly what he was saying. So people are talking kind of across each other, and just assuming the worst about everything that other people say and everyone's intentions, without really giving each other a little bit of grace, I think, which is one of the other reasons why I like Jeff Booth so much, is because he never really holds it against people for getting Bitcoin at their own pace. You know what I mean? Because he remembers what it was like for him when he was shouting Bitcoin to the from the rafters, but at the same time, he had all these companies that didn't own Bitcoin. So he was like, well, wait a minute, I'm a hypocrite over here, right? So I think there's if you're being fair to other people and saying, look, they're doing Bitcoin to the best of their ability. And maybe some of the OGs would have lower blood pressure, but it's all good for Bitcoin in the end.
Totally. And that's part of the problem with any community, especially online communities, or platforms, social media platforms generally, right? Is like you only get snippets sometimes of what someone's saying, or a tweet here without context. And it's like you and I, we've listened to Saylor talk ad nauseum about Bitcoin and digital credit and prefs for dozens, if not hundreds of hours, right? Compared to the typical
Hundreds.
Bitcoiner hasn't consumed that much content. So like we kind of know the language that Saylor speaks. And yeah, you're right. I think people tend to talk past each other. We're all guilty of it. We all, take people out of context through various, interactions online or otherwise. And I think that's part of the disconnect is, people are like, oh, Saylor should be more of a purist. Saylor should be marketing in this way. And, we're all human. We're all fallible. We're all going to make mistakes. Our marketing, and the way we talk about investments, the way we talk about Bitcoin are going to be different than somebody else's flavor. And, the fact of the matter is, this is a really insidery conversation, right? Is like, Saylor tweeting on Twitter, yeah, sure, it gets picked up in financial news from time to time, but like most investors, even in Bitcoin, aren't just on X all day, right? Most investors in Bitcoin treasury companies certainly aren't glued to X or understand the broader context and don't even know these discussions are happening. So sometimes we make a big deal of them, and they are important certainly, but the fact of the matter is there's like it's just a small portion of what people are talking about in the broader context.
Yeah, I will say this though, with Saylor, like there's a lot of stuff that I have come out and defended, right? So when they gave the mNAV guidance, I didn't like it, but they addressed it within a couple of weeks, and I was glad that they did it. I feel like they kind of, I don't know if they come right out and admitted their mistake, but they did change it, and they amended it to give themselves some flexibility there. So, I can defend that. I can defend the ATM, the accretive dilution. I can defend all of these things, I think, with actual principles. But let's be real. He said they would never sell the Bitcoin, right? So for him to come out and say, well, I never said we would never sell the Bitcoin. I said you should never sell the Bitcoin. Okay, look, we could go back. I've watched like you said, hundreds of hours of Saylor. I heard you say it, right? You know what I mean?
Yes.
So if he just came out and said, look, remember when I said we're never going to sell a Bitcoin? Look, we need to do this to make it, to increase the credit quality of the prefs. That is, we're hanging our hat on that product, and that's what's going to allow us to buy more Bitcoin. So we got to sell a little bit of Bitcoin to buy even more Bitcoin. I could come out and defend that, and you'd be like, awesome, Saylor, you took accountability for what you said and you're changing your mind. But to just gaslight people and say that you didn't say it, like, come on, the internet never forgets. We can freaking go back and rewatch the damn video. And if you think about it, he's already been forgiven for shitting on Bitcoin. He hated Bitcoin. Remember that famous tweet when he was like, I can't remember exactly what he said. Do you remember what he said? It was like, Bitcoin will never take off.
Yeah.
Did he say it was a bubble or a tulip or something? Anyway,
Yeah.
and he
From
Bitcoiners
2013.
dragged him for that. But then when he became a laser-eyed maxi, like if you just say, I was wrong about what I said before, I'm changing my mind, we will forgive a lot. But he's digging his heels in, and kind of like, it's unfortunate because he's giving the hate fuel. He's giving the haters legit fuel. Usually the bears are full of shit, right? Almost all of the FUD is bullshit. And I'm happy to dispel FUD, right? But he's giving them that little chink that they need to cling to and say, oh, see, he lied about this, and now he's lying about everything. I'm like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
I still, like, he's the guy that literally, Tim said that grain of salt orange pilled him. Well, I thought I was a Bitcoiner until I saw 25 hours of Michael Saylor on Breedlove's podcast, What is Money? And then I was like, oh my God, now I'm a Bitcoiner. Now I understand the entire history of money, and I understand the escalation of like warfare and humans using the tools to become dominant in the hierarchy. And I was like, oh my God, like Bitcoin is the apex instrument that is going to dominate all other forms of money. And so I credit the information that I learned from Michael Saylor himself as like making me, I don't know, real Bitcoiner or whatever. Like I think it was not long after that I stopped shitcoining. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, I'm just going to dump all my ETH. I'm going to dump all my, dude, I had dozens and dozens of just cryptos on shitcoin casinos. I had 4 or 5 different exchanges. I was on Bittrex. I got a VPN so that I could spoof my IP address to Asia so that I could trade on Binance, because Binance had shitcoins that you couldn't get in the United States. And so before Binance had a US platform, I used to trade Binance coin and all other kinds of happy horse shit. And I attribute some of the things that I learned from Michael Saylor, were formative in my Bitcoin journey. And then in 2024, once I saw Quant Bros 1 and I went all in on strategy, 6 months later, I put in my 2 weeks notice and quit. Literally I owe Saylor a lot in my Bitcoin journey. I mean, everybody has to orange pill themselves. I know we say other people orange pilled us, but like literally everyone orange pilled themselves. Other people can help, but like you have to do the work and you have to develop the conviction on your own. So, but yeah, I give the guy a lot of credit for my Bitcoin journey and my ability to stop playing and going to my freaking fiat job. So it does pain me to see him make these miscalculations and missteps and piss off the cyber hornets. You know what I mean? Like, he's the one that brought up the cyber hornet metaphor, I think, right? Or maybe he adopted it from somebody else, but like he's pissing the cyber hornets off. And it sucks for me to be kind of caught in the middle of that and kind of seeing a little bit of both sides and like, yeah, he could have done this better. He could have done that better. I still think he's a good actor in the space, and I think he's good for Bitcoin. I think strategy is good for Bitcoin. So I haven't sold, but yeah, we'll get over it. But
Yeah.
once the number goes up, a lot of this shit will be forgiven.
That's right. It will disappear. And, Michael Saylor's done so much for helping people go down that orange journey, that orange, have that orange pilling moment. And he certainly brought that orange pill to Wall Street and, to capital allocators who have, real vehicle that had options, really turned into a really robust options market, to access Bitcoin in a regulated way in the United States. And yeah, like there's plenty I disagree with Michael Saylor, right? Like I think he's great for Bitcoin. I'm a investor in his companies. I believe in the mission that he's doing. And there's things I disagree with him on, I would say all the time, because I'm covering what he does. I'm paying attention to what he says all the time. Like there's plenty I disagree with, and it's like, oh, that was a little misstep, or I would have done this differently. He's certainly running a public S&P level class company way better than I could do. But of course, there's going to be missteps. He's learning on the fly. He's making he's building this market from the ground up, and yeah. All criticism is fair. I just think there's been like a little bit of unfair, undue criticism that's like really incomplete and has taken him out of context. And I think that's too bad. But like you said, the next bull market, the next leg up is going to get rid of a lot of that, and then we'll have other things to argue about and talk about. It's I remembered one of his tweets, I think it was, about Bitcoin back in 2013. This was 7 years before he really revisited Bitcoin during COVID, and got orange pilled properly by Eric Weiss. But Saylor said that Bitcoin would go the way of online gambling, and
Is that what
maybe
it
he
was?
was
That's a
actually
quick
right,
quote.
because online gambling was like kind of getting regulated out of existence in the early 2010s, online poker. But look at the resurgence it's had. It's like it's everywhere, for better or for worse. And I think Bitcoin's had a real it had its IPO moment, so to speak, in the last couple of years. So it's funny to see that.
Yeah, you just made me think of something because, strategy is an amplified Bitcoin play, right? But then again, the haters are waiting for him to make the tiniest little mistake so that they can like magnify it times 10. So like maybe strategy amplifies not just the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin hate too. You know what I mean? Like they get 2x hate directed back at them every time they say something that people don't like.
I love that. We're gonna have to make that a mainstream topic, and maybe we can add it as a metric to our dashboard on BitcoinTreasuries.net. Bitcoin hate factor. No,
We're trading at 2x Bitcoin mNAV hate.
that's right.
Hate nav.
Yeah, hate nav. I love it. Speaking of mNAV, what do you make of the, whole debate around, mNAV? Jack Mallers has been around out there. He's the CEO of 21. Who he's asked a lot of questions. He asked some questions to Saylor in Prague at the recent Bitcoin conference. Asking about what is mNAV? I don't even know. I can't keep it straight. And he's thrown some shade at some of these neo metrics, these new metrics that have popped up. And again, we're kind of building this space from the ground up. So there's going to be metrics that come and go that ebb and flow, that work, that don't work, that are fair characterizations. Ultimately it comes down to the investment thesis is, can a company like Strategy add more Bitcoin per share to the common shareholder and basically outperform it because of the way it can access capital markets. But what do you make of that, discussion around mNAV? There has been changes on, how companies like Strategy characterize it and, whether they use enterprise value, whether or not they use the preferred equities as a measure of that. Where do you land with all that?
Depending on which mNAV you use, it's going to determine the actual legit number where ATMing the common to buy Bitcoin is actually accretive or not. So I don't really care which mNAV they use, but you have to be consistent with one that you're using, and then you have to do the calculations to figure out what the actual number is that makes it accretive or not. And I think Crater was saying that the different mNAV is better, and this was not accretive, this was dilutive, and he's been really sounding off on that. I tend to believe that the mNAV for all of these treasury companies is trending towards 1. But I also kind of think that's true for every company that's not a Bitcoin company, which is bad news for anyone who doesn't have Bitcoin, because if your mNAV is trending towards 1x of your Bitcoin stash and you have no stash, then that means the value of your company is trending to 0, right? To me, that's the definition of hyper Bitcoinization, is if you don't have any, you're literally worthless. And so I think that's the case for anyone who, as you see Bitcoin grow, if you're not able to increase the value of your company to keep up with Bitcoin's CAGR, then your Bitcoin stack is going to continue to become a greater and greater and greater portion of your company's value. So to a certain extent, I think that every single company on the planet is trending to a degree towards 1x mNAV. It's going to be a little bit above that, because whatever enterprise value you do have, whatever the value of your products and services are, will give you that 1x mNAV plus something, right? So every company will be like 1x mNAV plus a little something, whatever the value that you're delivering to the world. So it really doesn't bother me. And to a certain extent, it doesn't even bother me if depending on which mNAV you're using, if it goes below 1 and stays there forever, it also kind of doesn't matter, because let's just say it rotates between 0.9 and 1, but never even goes above 1. Well, anybody who got in at 0.9, was accretive once it gets to 1. Now, the people who bought in at the top are going to have to wait maybe an extra cycle or an extra few years for the mNAV to go back up to where it previously was. But the point is that even if it trades sub 1x mNAV forever, as long as the amplification justifies and overcomes that gap, Bitcoin treasury companies still outperform Bitcoin. I think about it this way, even just regular Bitcoiners that don't have anything to do with treasury companies understand that you can leverage your Bitcoin, right? If you let's just say when Bitcoin is at 100,000, if you had 100 grand and you bought a Bitcoin, well, now you have 1x mNAV, right? But if you went to somewhere and you leveraged it and you were like, hey, I'm going to give you 100 grand and you're going to give me 2 Bitcoin. Well, if Bitcoin goes up to 200 grand, now your 2 Bitcoin's worth 4. you can pay the guy back his, his 100 grand, and now you can keep the difference. So everyone understands that leveraged Bitcoin, as long as you don't get liquidated during the drawdowns, can net you more Bitcoin in the future. So that's literally just what the companies are doing. So if the amplification outweighs whatever kind of sub 1x mNAV scenario they live in perpetuity, I'm fine with it. Now, I think that any open-minded person should be able to identify their falsification criteria. So I believe that strategy will continue to outperform Bitcoin. My thesis will be invalidated if, over the next 5 years, if that doesn't happen, then I was wrong. And I have to admit that. And I'd be like, okay, well, now I just have to dump all my shares, because if we're like, not outperforming Bitcoin over an entire cycle, then I was wrong. And I'll have to admit that. And so we can all bookmark that and come back to see in 5 years whether the prefs work or not.
That's right. Well, we'll have a solution, and we'll know who was correct or not, because that's the nature of capital markets. That's the nature of investing, right? I saw Parker Lewis talk about that, and he thinks, I think his large point, even though I disagree with some of the math he might have used, I think it was not non-contextual, or used in the wrong way. But he talks about, there's execution risk with a Bitcoin treasury company. There's counterparty risk, of course. As Bitcoiners, we know not self-custodying your Bitcoin versus trusting it with a third party, even if it is a Bitcoin treasury company that's regulated, is some amount of risk. And I think a lot of strategy investors would think that's a very, very small but not negligible risk. There's key man risk, of course, with Saylor. If something were to happen to him, obviously he's got a great team with Fong at the helm there as CEO as well. But there are like risk with any equity, and but I think everybody knows that, right? When you invest in a company, you're responsible. No one can invest for you. Investing isn't a team game. Like, you're making a decision. You're investing your capital, and the hope is that you're making a wise investment decision, so you can increase your returns and outpace the debasement of fiat dollars, certainly. And the difference is a lot of strategy investors are already using Bitcoin as their unit of account, right? So it is a bigger hurdle to outperform Bitcoin, but one that I think Saylor's been able to execute on really well in the first 5-6 years of the strategy. I'd love to chat with you about the state of the options market. How is there still a lot of liquidity there with strategy, or a lot of options traders selling covered calls? What are you seeing with, and maybe you can, for viewers who maybe didn't catch your prior episodes with me, just give a little high level view of what you're doing with your strategy, and the different companies you're trading there. Tesla, you've traded some miners in the past.
Yep. Previously, I've been very resistant to take any kind of directional position. As an option seller, I'm willing to just take the capped upside, right? And take those small wins that aggregate, weekly, monthly, and over time, instead of trying to just hit home runs. But with the spam war and with the kind of, I guess, bearishness I have over the global macro scenario, and kind of thinking we're going to probably bottom over the summer, in the August timeframe that I mentioned, I've changed my strategy a little bit. So I've been very, very aggressive with my covered calls. Usually I leave a little bit of upside, like 10-20% upside, when I'm selecting my strikes, just in case everything goes up. I haven't been doing that at all. It hasn't always worked, because we pumped from 120 to 185, something like that, 190, before retracing. But I just kind of feel like there's going to be a lot more of that. So I'm not really building any upside into my positions until the spam war is concluded. Once that happens, I'm actually tempted to stop capping my upside completely for a certain period of time, because I think, especially if BIP 110 is successful, I think we moon. I think that restores confidence in the network, and Bitcoin will have rid itself of a parasitic disease. And so it's weird for me to even be thinking these things, because as a pure option seller, those things don't even figure into my thinking. I just mechanically sell weekly or monthly covered calls and just take the premium that's given. And those are still very lucrative. There's a ton of premium to still be had on all of those Bitcoin Treasury company positions. So the only stocks in my portfolio, in the one that I have in size, are Strategy, of course. I also have a Tesla position. My theory was that if Tesla starts to moon because of Cybercab, then I can like rebalance, kind of almost like a pairs trade, and rebalance between them and Strategy. But they've all been pumping at the same time because they've just been following the market. So that little theory has not worked for me. I'm hoping that that they can at least just kind of pump at different times and let me rotate in and out of these things. But the market gods are not participating. So let's see, we got Strategy, Tesla. I've been trying to add as much Strive as I can with the premiums. So when I sell something and collect a premium, and then I can add a Strive position, I've been trying to do that. And I guess full disclosures, I'm on the True North podcast. True North got bought by Strive. They have sent me a couple of checks. I do not have any formal agreement with them. So I basically work for free with no contract. And then once they got purchased, they sent me a check for all the work that I had done before the purchase. And then on the most recent conference that we attended, I think they sent me like $1,000 just to cover it didn't even cover the hotel, my own hotel cost. So I don't have a formal agreement with them, but I'm on the show, right? And they are owned by Strive, so people should know that. So I have that position that I've been trying to add. And then if I have some cash that I don't, like if it's not enough to sell a cash secured put, it's like $500 worth of cash, I'll just buy like 5 shares of SATA or Stretch, just in teeny tiny small amounts. And then if you're using a margin account, which I guess this is where we have to do the not financial advice disclaimer. But in a margin account, you have to be careful because you can get yourself into trouble by overspending. But there's a couple of companies like Cypher, which is a mining company. If you sell cash secured puts out to like 45 days, maybe 20% out of the money, it's very capital efficient, at least in my Tasty Trade account. And so I do have a few of those positions as well. But that's like 1% of the portfolio. There's a couple of other miners that I'll have in smaller accounts like Wolf. There's only a couple of, so I won't hold any stock position that doesn't have Bitcoin, right? It isn't either a Bitcoin miner or a Bitcoin treasury company or have Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Tesla has Bitcoin in the balance sheet, so they qualify. People don't think of them traditionally as a Bitcoin treasury company, but they got a shitload of it. So technically they qualify as being in my portfolio, but they're all built on Bitcoin. I literally won't hold any stock that doesn't have Bitcoin in the balance sheet. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. What are you looking for, as SpaceX IPO'd, just a few trading days ago? And I pulled up an article in between. We recorded a stream before this, Soleil, and I pulled up an article talking about, some of the crazy trades that were happening. Options are already live on SpaceX. You mentioned to me they've only got, I think, monthlies.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just been billions of dollars of premium already traded in, 3 or 4 trading days. Yeah, they've obviously got Bitcoin on the balance sheet. They've got 18,000 some Bitcoin. Is
Yeah,
that
they
going to be an
qualify.
interesting? Yeah, is that going to be an
Yeah,
interesting play?
I will watch. Once they get weeklies, which will probably maybe take another couple of weeks, it'll become a little bit more interesting. It is kind of pricey, so you can't just like, options contracts are in increments of 100 shares, so you can't just like dip a toe in and like, I'm gonna buy 1 share for $400. What is it? They're trading at 200?
Yeah, 200.
$200. And so, once they get the weekly options, it'll become a little bit more attractive. But when I looked at it, the liquidity was already very good. It was like there was tons of bids and asks, plenty of contracts being opened and closed. I was like, holy crap, this is like already just very, very, very heavily traded. So that's good news. You want liquidity because you want to be able to have a nice tight bid ask spread so that you get favorable entry and exit positions, especially your exit position, because when you get into a contract, it's a lot easier to get into a contract. Like, even if you win that bet, to try to exit that trade is the important part, because if the bid ask spread is really wide and you're trying to take profits, you might end up getting a lot less than really you kind of deserve there. So that's kind of bullish. They do own a bunch of Bitcoin themselves. So it is interesting to me, and I kind of feel like there's going to be a lot of hype. I think SpaceX is overvalued to a certain extent right now. And as a Tesla holder, I can kind of just wait a couple of years for them to merge. That's not like 100% guarantee, but I think it's inevitable. So I can kind of just sit around and wait and get my SpaceX exposure once Tesla and SpaceX merge together. But like, whenever SpaceX hits resistance, I'm guessing it crashes another like at least 50% from there. Probably 75% of the gains will probably, draw down about. So then it would start to become a little bit more interesting to start selling cash secured puts to enter into that position, because I'm certain the options premium would be pretty juicy in a scenario like that. So I'll wait for the damn thing to moon. I'll wait for the weekly options to mature, and once it peaks and then starts to contract again, I would start looking at maybe some cash secured put entries at that point.
Yeah, we'll have to get the update from you when that takes place. I bet there's a lot of people looking in there. There are probably a few millionaire makers from the options explosion here right from the get go. I think SpaceX stock was up 40% at one point yesterday or Monday.
Yeah, but they
So,
didn't have options when it mooned, like
They
when it went
didn't.
from 130 to 200. So I think the options became available yesterday,
Okay.
maybe the
So
day
everyone's
before if I
getting
wasn't paying
wrecked.
attention.
Everyone's getting
Yeah,
wrecked then, huh?
the very first day on the IPO, you could only just buy or sell. So, but
Yeah.
you could do that, but I don't know. I guess you could leverage on margin, but you couldn't leverage with long calls at that point. So
Got
people
it.
buying calls now, I don't think got anything, because it's just been kind of hovering around 200.
Mhm.
So
Nice. So the market makers are making their spreads. Yeah, be interesting to monitor that. Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot in the space about how so much of the air is being sucked out of the room with the SpaceX IPO, with people rotating into the AI trade. That's put some downward pressure on Bitcoin's price. Because capital that otherwise would have flown into Bitcoin, it has rotated or has been invested into these AI trades. We've got IPOs coming from OpenAI and Anthropic soon, so that's probably going to draw some more cash out. We're sitting still near record levels of money that's just sitting in money market accounts too. So like, at some point, Bitcoin's gonna become the fastest horse in town, and really excited to see where that takes the market and takes Bitcoin Treasury companies like Strategy, like Strive. So really excited for that. But as Bitcoin goes, we usually have a year or two of sideways action where it feels like not a lot's happening, and you want to go out there and poke Bitcoin with a stick. But anything else you're thinking about with regard to Bitcoin Treasury companies, Soleil, that we didn't touch on that you found interesting?
I mean, talking about the capital rotation, I I think maybe the reason why Stretch hasn't recovered to the extent that SATA has, might be because of the daily dividends, in the sense that there is some capital rotation, right? So people probably were invested in Stretch and SATA and are like, oh, I want to get in on the SpaceX thing. So there was some capital that's moving. But on top of that, I think it's going to be harder to short SATA. So people that also were looking for a way to short something and then put even more money in SpaceX were probably able to more easily short Stretch, because they could hold it basically penalty free until X dividend date. Whereas people can't just short SATA, and because they're gonna have to pay that dividend daily. So once the AI IPO craze is over, then Stretch probably recovers. And some people were like, oh, Stretch has to do something to fix it. I'm like, no, they really don't. They can just do they can just follow the plan, right? If the weighted moving average is under a certain number, they just increase the freaking yield. That's all they got to do is follow the plan that they've had all along. There's nothing broken about it, I don't think. But something that you mentioned about the European companies pooling their money to do a pref, I think is extremely interesting. Is that almost like a credit union? You know, like if you don't want the big banks, you can just do your local credit union, and maybe you'll get better services, you know, in that way. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of moving mechanics for something like that to happen, and if some of these companies can, you know, move to make this kind of like blended preferred equity, I think that would be really cool. It would definitely be a first of its kind. I've got to imagine it's almost like an ETF, right? Like some sort of synthetic ETF where these companies are able to list, a preference share, as they call it in Europe, and kind of be able to employ the strategy that Saylor is able to do here in U.S. capital markets, without necessarily that large scale. So yeah, we'll be keen to monitor that, and I think seeing the success of the daily dividends that Strive has implemented with SATA, seeing the success that Michael Saylor's had in a bear market to raise so much capital to buy Bitcoin with these prefs. We're just going to see so many more people try this. Some will succeed, some will fail, and yeah, I can't wait to see how that market plays out. And it's certainly been one of the most interesting stories to monitor in our space.
We got to end this on a bullish note. So, with regard to the capital rotating out, have you ever seen video of right before a tidal wave?
Yeah, oh yeah.
When the water recedes? So that's what's happening. Like the water is receding, it's going into all of these IPO AI plays, and when that money comes back, it's just going to be a tsunami of capital flowing back into Bitcoin. And when it rips, people are going to be FOMOing in. And like I said, the spam war will get a resolution to that. We will get a resolution to the Iran war at some point. And so all of these things will deliver certainty to an uncertain world. And, Bitcoin is going to moon. I think big things coming in 2026, 2027-ish.
You heard it here. Big things coming in the next year. Can't wait to track it all with you and have you back on to cover it. Soleil, let everyone know where they can find you online.
X at Night Who Says Knee, and my YouTube channel I think is called the same thing, but I do a show called Orange Pill Investor on YouTube, and then of course I'm on most Wednesdays with the True North crew on that show.
Great stuff, Soleil. And one thing we have everybody say, stay orange.
Stay orange.
Great stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, the options Bitcoin Treasury guru, Soleil.